Welcome to Householders, a conversation about American life as Zen practice. I'm Inga Annie Wade.
And I'm Kyosaku John Mitchell, and we're lay members of the Atlanta Soto Zen Center. So the thing with babies is that they change constantly. So just when you get into a rhythm of some kind, something changes. And as we've discussed, my whole pandemic schedule has been built around waking up early in the morning to practice for a long time. And the baby being born was surprisingly not very disruptive to that for a while. And that's because when babies are super little, they sleep for a long time, for like 18 hours a day. So it worked. But her sleep schedule is shifting, and the mornings are, it's been pushing me back earlier and earlier. So for a long time, I was waking up at 5:30. Now then I was waking up at 5. And then I started adding 5 minutes of chanting that I wasn't doing before. So so my current alarm is 4:55. But for the last, and that's like really early. Like I have to go to sleep at 9 o'clock in order to get enough sleep. And that doesn't happen ever.
Yeah.
Because I need to do something to unwind, as we were discussing in our last episode. Usually we like to watch something or do something to like force decompress after the stressful bedtime. So getting to bed by 9 p.m., that like never happens. So I'm averaging like 6.5 hours of sleep a night.
Oh, no.
And that is pretty rough. But now, in the last week, the baby has been waking up earlier and earlier and earlier, to the point that this morning, actually, for the first time, she woke up before I even had a chance to sit down and do Zazen at all. Like it had been, 10 minutes in or 20 minutes in, which is bad enough. And then I would bring her to my wife and she would feed her and then try to put her back to sleep. And sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. And I have had to I have had to cut off, early several times. But now it's like she's waking up the same time I am, and I don't know what to do. So anyway, the thing I want to actually talk about, I'm just complaining. What I actually want to talk about with you is when real life intervenes in a schedule, in a regular practice, a daily practice like we have or try to have. There comes a point for me where you have to take it as a sign that the daily practice that you're trying to maintain isn't possible, that it's not the right practice. I want to believe in such a holistic view of Zen that the right practice is the one you can do. And if you're forcing some amount of time into some particular time slot every day and your day doesn't actually support it, or you're sacrificing so much sleep that it's unhealthy in order to do it.
Yeah.
That's not the right practice to do. So I feel like I should change something. But there's also this heavy burden of having committed to this amount of practice and this form of practice. And it's Zazen and then Kinhin and then Qigong and then sutras, there's all these specific things. Like I have figured out sort of which ones I can feel okay about not doing in a pinch one day if I have to go. But I don't want to remove things from that list. Those all feel like important things to me. And shortening the Zazen feels really weird. I feel like the longest chunk of this practice that I have is Zazen, and that amount of Zazen feels like the training. It feels like the important part of what I'm doing. So there's a tension, and I have no idea. I don't have something to say right now about like how to resolve these two things. Like on the one hand, this isn't the right practice if it's not fitting into my life. And on the other hand, it's not okay to like make excuses to not try as hard as you can. in to paraphrase Matsuo Kuroshi, never give up is the quote that Sensei always tells us from Matsuo Kuroshi. The most important thing is to never give up. And I feel that pressure, when on the amount of practice that I'm doing. And I don't know how to navigate these conflicting impulses.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think that you're right that if it's not working, it's not working. Like, that's not a good practice if you're stressing out about having to fit it into your schedule like the way it is now. And also, like, your sleep should come first, because that's a part of, our precepts that we've talked about in a way. Like, don't do things that cloud your mind.
You got to pull out the fifth precept on me.
Your mind is going to be clouded. At least mine is when I don't sleep.
Yeah. Mine totally is.
I'm absolutely not, like, I feel like I'm not myself, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. Mm-hmm. I don't feel like I act the way I should act because my mind is clouded by lack of sleep. And my lack of sleep, if I got 6 hours a night, oh man, I would be so mean.
Yeah. It's hard for me to tell what it's doing to me because my sleep has been so utterly destroyed for 2.5 years. Like, I haven't had a full night of sleep like I used to have since my first kid was born. I'm just like this now,
I have no idea what that would be like. I get annoyed if I miss a couple of hours of sleep one night. I'm just like tired the whole day.
Yeah.
Like, I can't function. I know, like, supposedly people with lupus are supposed to get more sleep than other people, but I think I still just get the right amount, like mm-hmm. I think the ideal for me is 9 hours, but I probably don't get that much. Probably get like 7 or 8, mm-hmm. but 6 is like, I would feel like a zombie. And yeah, I mean, I remember the story about Siddhartha. He was meditating and, he was like, the practice at that time had been like, you should starve yourself, basically.
Right. Yeah. The sort of conventional spiritual thing to do.
Yeah. And then once he did that, he was like, this is not working. Mm-hmm. Maybe he realized that it was clouding his mind and he wasn't like really in the clearest state to be doing meditation. So that probably worked against him. And I think that that's something we have to consider, that, in my opinion, you really have to take all the things that are going to make you healthy as part of your practice. Mm-hmm. So exercising, eating good, mindful eating, sleeping, having a regular sleep schedule that's good for you, and meditation. Like, I think they're all a part of it, but you shouldn't sacrifice one for the other. Like, oh, I either can eat or go to the gym. Like, I can't do both. That would be... I mean, sometimes people do. Sometimes it gets so busy you can't go to the gym and you can't eat healthy. But it shouldn't be something that you're sacrificing to do meditation, because they're all like equally important.
Yes, I agree with those principles. There are a couple of complicating factors.
Okay.
The first being that my sleep will not be okay regardless.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So like that's definitely contributed to my motivation to do this, because there's never more than 6.5 hours of sleep available to me, given the interruptions in the middle of the night and the just sort of rigor of the day. I obviously, like, I could go back to sleep after the baby wakes me up at 5 a.m. Mm-hmm. And get another hour and a half or two, which is what my wife does. But I'm already up, I actually, and then, so that sort of leads me to the other complicating factor, which is being awake early in the morning is really, really good for me psychologically and spiritually, regardless of whether I'm doing the practice.
Yeah.
So like, it has to do with stress, which I think factors in as a physical health aspect of the choice that I have to, or the choices I have to make here, at least as much, if not more, than a psychological factor, because, stress, I mean, we know there are all kinds of physiological, like, health problems caused by stress. And that includes like tension and other sort of physical ways of carrying myself that then lead to behavior that, like anger and, other kinds of tense behavior that's bad for emotional reasons. And the Zazen just multiplies that effect by a million, because the tension, the physical tension, like, instead of just waking up and getting stressed out, I'm spending so long preparing myself for the day that I'm just so much more able to handle it by the time everybody is up and stuff is happening. And so I do think of this long practice in the morning. I don't just think of it as a health matter. I feel it as a health matter.
Right.
And when I miss it, I feel worse, physically worse. So it's kind of, there's kind of no good, there's kind of no way to be super healthy right now. And given that, it feels like practice is, doing, whatever I can to maintain the sort of endurance part of practice instead of just rolling with whatever happens, feels like a benefit. But obviously there's a middle way in here somewhere.
Mm.
The fact that the first place you went was like the Buddha rejected asceticism, that raises for me a concern about myself, that I'm driving it too hard. And it kind of harkens back to stuff we said about Zen at the very beginning of this show, about this sort of militarism of formal Japanese style Zen, and how that's not what we do as householders. So like, I think I'm susceptible to being like that. I think I've said that in other conversations about this. Like, I think that there is something about that strictness that appeals to me. I mean, Sensei named me Kiyosaki for a reason.
Yeah. Wait, did we ever explain that to people, what that?
I can't remember, so we might as well. I mean,
I think we go over it again, because
Yeah.
I feel like you talked about the Kiyosaku stick, but you didn't like draw the connection between you and your name and what you thought that meant.
Yeah, that's true. So the moment I really knew that Sensei knew me as a person was the moment at Jukai when he gave me that name. And I didn't know that before. Why would I know that before? All I'd had was Zoom calls with him. I'd never met him in person until that day, I think. And I didn't know how much of a sense he was able to get of me. Of course, that's the Zen teacher's job. So he knew my path backwards and forwards in order to pick me that name, clearly. And when he said the name at the beginning of his little blessing that he gave, I lost my composure. I was like, oh my God. I didn't say anything out loud. But like,
no, that was my reaction too.
Yeah.
Honestly, I was like, that's his name. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I was pumped about it, but I also already knew that he knew why he called me that.
Well, for everybody who doesn't know, say what it means.
So the translation he gave was the blow of compassion. My understanding is that Kyosaku is kind of like an acronym. Like, I don't know what the actual words are that it stands for, but it means the blow of compassion, at least translated, in this sort of flowery way. And in Rinzai, it's called the Keisaku, which means the blow of awakening, I think. And so the description that Sensei gave at Jukai was to distinguish the meaning of Kyosaku versus the stereotype people might have about people hitting people with sticks in Zen, which is probably based on the Rinzai practice, which is there's somebody prowling around behind you to see if you're not sitting up straight, and then they just suddenly zap you if you're not. And in Soto, that's not how it works, apparently. I mean, it's unclear to me how much this has been changed in the United States, but in any case, the way that it's practiced now in Soto Zen in America is that you bow to signal to the teacher that you request the Kyosaku if you're sitting in the Zendo and you're nodding off, or you can't concentrate or what have you. And I think maybe that there are situations where you're on sesshin with your teacher in a trusted situation where the sort of consent is assumed, and they'll come, wake you up with it. But for the most part, what we're doing is we're signaling to the person holding the kyosaku that we want to be struck, and then they come over and they do it, and they wake you up, and you bow again to thank them for their help. And so he explains this, and then he said the parting words that he had for me were, "Don't hit anybody unless they ask for it." And he said this with this sort of smile that made me feel like that was the reference. That was the thing that he was saying about me, is that I have this severity, this force and this severity that can wake people up. But the caution that my teacher has for me about it is to make sure that that is being requested of me before I use it. And like, I really honor that reflection from him, because I can tell that what he means is this is a very valuable asset in a sangha to have somebody with this kind of force. And it's just, the practice of that person to be discerning and compassionate with the use of it. Mm-hmm. And something else he knows about me, which maybe he didn't quite yet know at the time, although he probably did, honestly, we'd been sitting together for long enough, is that the person I hit the hardest without consent is myself.
Absolutely.
And so this is what I'm doing. I'm literally waking myself up with an alarm to go sit zazen harder every day. And so when you brought up the Buddha's sort of turn away from asceticism, I immediately leapt to, am I being too, I almost said too rinzai. Am I being too strict with myself?
Well, I think that would kind of make sense in that context.
Yeah,
too.
Probably.
No, I mean, I think that I think because your first encounters with like Zen was rinzai, I think there's probably some of that involved in it too, where you have sort of leftover habits and behaviors, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, macho-ness.
Yeah.
You could say. Yeah, that's definitely what drew me in, in the first place, was just the hardcoreness of Zen. And there's something that I still honor about that. Because I find so much American contemporary spirituality to be so fluffy.
Loosey-goosey.
Yeah, and not rigorous. And I just have this belief that's born out from experience that fluffiness and loosey-goosiness leads to giving up in the practice.
Right. I don't know. I don't think so, because maybe you just want to practice.
No, I for sure want to practice.
Well, when we were having that conversation about like having a goal versus like, you're not supposed to have a goal, but what's going to drive you to sit if you don't have the goal. And with me, I'm like you in a lot of ways. Maybe if people were to compare us, maybe you could be a little bit more rigorous. I'm not sure, but I try not to bring that into my Zen practice, because since that when I am very rigorous about stuff, eventually I get burned out. Mm-hmm. That I'm like, kind of like, I only have so much momentum to keep that up. Whereas like with Zen, I just want to do it. I just want to, help serve the community, and I just want to sit down, but I don't do it as much as you. Again, like that's kind of the trade-off, right? You might not do it as much if you're not having this kind of internal rigorous push behind you.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's still pushing me is the belief that, and I should already, alarm bell should be going off in my head, because belief being a motivation here is pretty risky feeling. But it's a belief that it's like any other form of physical conditioning. We have talked about this before, where like someday, if I keep pushing myself this hard, someday it will be just what I do in a way that doesn't require pushing. And it doesn't really require very much pushing now. Like that's something I should really celebrate, actually, is that compared to other periods of time in my life where like making myself meditate for 20 minutes was like the biggest burden of my day. Like, and I almost never did it.
Yeah.
This is a breeze. It is something that I want to do. And that's why I jump out of bed at 5 in the morning, 4:55 in the morning. But
oh my God.
There's a longer term pressure that I'm putting on myself to like have this much sitting, add up over time in some way. And Sensei always gets, his brow always wrinkles when I start talking about amounts of Zazen.
Yeah.
But you're bringing it up too in an interesting way. Like you said, but you don't sit as much as I do. And so what? I want to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, but there's something else that Sensei says a lot. And he goes, when you sit still enough, long enough.
Yep.
So there is some sort of amount to it. Like, to get the truest benefit, I don't know that 5 minutes a day is really enough, but maybe, just maybe, it's not even about getting the benefits at all.
Yeah, good for nothing, right? But the thing that I always find brilliant about the still enough, long enough formula is that it is a formula. The thing I think he's getting at with sit still enough, long enough is that it's an equation, right? Like there's a still enough that like compensates for some amount of long enough, and a long enough that compensates for some amount of still enough, so that like if you're sitting infinitely still for 1 second, that's the same thing as sitting a little bit still for an hour or something like that, So like the sense I always get from him about the how long should I sit question is that you should sit long enough to give yourself a chance to sit still enough for any amount of time.
Yeah, that's true.
And like I kind of already knew that because well, I don't know. I don't know how fixed of a thing this is, but it has always been my experience that like something happens after 30 minutes. Some kind of settling down happens after roughly 30 minutes. And I can almost tell just from the quality of what's happening that it's been 30 minutes. And sitting less than 30 minutes doesn't have that same quality for me unless I already sat for 30 minutes that day. That's kind of the thing. If I sit for long enough in the morning, I can sit for 5 minutes later and sit still enough. And that's part of what contributes to why I'm doing so much practice in the mornings, because it gets me into this physical state where it's always available for the rest of the day, no matter how stressed out and ridiculous the rest of the day is. And I want to make sure that lasts all day. And I know this sounds like very quantitative and very sort of productivity oriented or something like that. But that's really not what I'm trying. That's not the sense in which I mean that. Like, it's like stretching my body, you know, like Zazen is yoga, and you do yoga to condition your body to be in like an open receiving and giving energy state. Right. And I don't think that there's any reason to consider Zazen anything other than that. It's just in a particular sitting posture. And, other forms of meditation might be something else involving, mental clarity or whatever. But just sitting Zazen is a yoga practice, if you ask me. And I'm, I could break that down in all kinds of ways if you're skeptical, but like the reason I feel that way is that my whole body, the movement of my whole body changes for the whole day when I do this much Zazen at the very beginning of it. And I kind of want to believe that it like makes up for the lack of sleep, that I'm, moving and flowing and feeling better the rest of the day. I could sleep for 8 hours and wake up in the middle of a complete chaos scene with my children and then be stressed out all day and reactive all day. or I could give up that sleep to prepare myself for it and handle that much better. And I genuinely believe that I do.
I mean, I definitely see the benefit of that for sure. I mean, it's something that I actually do, even though I was just talking about, like, I don't want to implement sort of like a rigorous schedule, but I think I'm actually at the point with starting a new full-time position that I do want to implement it as a scheduled routine, because I don't know if I am going to be my best self without it, or I don't know if I'm gonna be, if stress is gonna take over. Yeah, so I mean, I totally see that, and if you need that amount of meditation so that your mind is not clouded, then I guess that's what you need to do. But what happens when there's just not enough hours in a day to do everything you need to do?
Yeah. That's always true on some level. You know, this question, it's amazing how persistent this question is. And I feel like it's an American Buddhism problem. The moral risks of sitting this much, you know, like there's this whole engaged Buddhism movement that's happening in so many schools of Buddhism, where it's like people can't justify sitting because they have to go out and be an activist or whatever, and there's like not enough time to do both. And so teachers from more, you know, conservative maybe discipline like traditions in Buddhism that emphasize sitting more, like ours, teachers are always on the defensive against that. They're always having to make these justifications that are like, Zazen is an integral part of showing up in the world, and you need to do it in order to be a better activist and stuff like that, as a way of countering this idea that time spent doing Zazen is time spent not doing something else. And I believe that on a moral level, but there is such, like physical health is a different thing, you know? It's hard for me to know whether I'm hurting myself by getting 6.5 hours of sleep every day, because I don't know how quickly that damage shows up, you know? And also, it's just, like I said, it's just been like this for so long that I don't know what healthy sleep feels like anymore.
Well, yeah, and we were saying this might not be an optional thing for you. So, you know, if your baby's crying, it's not really like I'm just gonna sleep through it. I couldn't do that anyway.
Yeah, no, you can't do that. But I also can't sit through it, you know? Like that's been, I don't know if I've talked about this. That's been the thing that I've had to figure out how to do throughout this whole thing, is like just figure out how to not stop practicing when I have to get up and go upstairs and get the baby. And if I have to stay with the baby and skip the rest of practice, for sure that has to happen. But if I, you know, if there's going to be like 5 minutes of triage and then I hand her off to my wife and get to go back down and sit back down, even that, like, how do I pick back up? Like, how do I sit down and get back into my posture and then pick up where I left off, you know? And the answer is it can't be a picking up where I left off. It has to be a never leaving off in the first place. It has to be a continuous effort. And this is just the real householder stuff, right? There isn't time to be a Zen monk and a working father at the same time. So you have to be a Zen working father instead. Householders is a production of the Atlanta Soto Zen Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Silent Thunder Order. Find us on the web ataszc.org.
Our Sangha depends on your support. You can donate by PayPal to donate at storder.org. Gasho.